up to this event this evening, because there have been a lot of changes in the coroner's office since my entering of the office last year, and we're going to be talking about an extremely popular topic tonight, death. So I'm so glad that everyone is here to learn about death, because it is a real exciting thing to talk about. No. If I may, I'll begin by giving a little bit of a background so that those who are listening are aware of where my background is and my perspective, so that you can see how this was oriented as far as the office, our thoughts, why we're taking the direction that we're taking. And basically, we're going to be looking for a proposed expansion is the bottom line of what we're doing here, of the coroner's office, and having a medical examiner's office in Coeur d'Alene, because basically Spokane has been saturated. They've notified us that they're going to start capping the number of cases, which is going to impact our ability to be efficient and appropriate with the cases that we evaluate. So I had no intention when I entered this office of going down this pathway, but we've been pretty much forced to do it. And so that's why, well, if the need arises, we better step up and get her done. So I was newly elected to the office a little over a year ago, and my background is I'm a true native of Idaho. My great-grandfather homesteaded when Idaho became a state. So our lineage goes way, way back. I graduated from Coeur d'Alene High School, but I went to UCLA, undergrad, grad school, and med school. Started off as a level 1, level 2 trauma doc in Southern California, did that for several years, and had a 38-year-old male come in full cardiac arrest and couldn't revive him. And I thought, wow, I've got one of the finest medical educations in the world, and there's something that I wasn't taught, something that I don't have the full picture here. No one can explain why this 38-year-old didn't make it. And so I started thinking outside the box, not long after medical school. So I've been someone who's kind of questioned the narrative, questioned how I haven't been a robot with how I've approached things. I've approached things with my own investigation, my own inquisitive mind, should I say. And worked in preventive medicine. I had a family practice, myself and another doctor, of over 8,000 patients, so I'm oriented in that sense. But my journey in preventive medicine took me to being medical director of the largest supplement manufacturer in the world for 14 years, and so I've taught preventive medicine in 30 different countries around the world. So I've got a global historical view of medicine. It's not a real restricted view. Well, then why, if I'm interested in prevention, would I be interested in being a coroner? Well, the reason for that was that with the pandemics going around, I was medical director of that largest supplement manufacturer in the world when SARS-1 broke out. And the company was looking to me to determine whether or not it was safe to travel during that time period. Was it safe to go from Italy to Japan during a pandemic? So I knew about SARS viruses and coronaviruses back in 2003. It ran a 7-month course, went away without a vaccine, and hasn't been seen anywhere in the world since 2006. So my experience with the last pandemic was that there was some information that was maybe perhaps questionable, and maybe I could, with my experience, add some truth to what was going on. And that lies my interest in the coroner's office. Well, entering the office, I thought I had some idea of the importance of the office, but it's really interesting because the coroner's office is far more fundamental to the structural integrity of our society than you can imagine. Really, I was shocked by it to a certain degree. I mean, because if we don't do our job well, then there are people who may be committing a crime or a murder, and it was overlooked because we didn't do our job correctly, and we don't want to let any murderers loose, etc. Or if there is a cause of death that we don't fully evaluate, it might be something that could be spreading to others, etc. So we really need to be on top of what we're doing and be efficient at what we're doing to protect the citizens of Kootenai County. And so, first of all, I just want to say something real quickly about Commissioner Duncan. She's, from the moment I entered the office, she has been very, very supportive. She's here tonight, and I'm so thankful that Stan Mortensen, Prosecutor Stan Mortensen, is here as well to give his perspective of the need for our expansion. Because we've had to work together, especially on a couple of cases recently that had some recent impact on Kootenai County, and so I'll let him go ahead and explain that, but he's in support of this project as well, and I'm really thankful for the time that he's spending here tonight. So our agenda for this evening is that I'm going to talk about the current status of our coroner office and our comparisons to the two other large counties in Idaho, so that you have some idea of statistics and numbers and what is seen in that's Ada and Kootenai Canyon. And our statistics, the number of calls, et cetera, what we're doing with overdoses, because overdoses are going up because of fentanyl, and that directly impacts our office significantly. And then the Spokane medical costs and statistics and recent communications between the two offices, which really pushed me in this direction. Our initial proposal, like what could we do to expand, and we went down that pathway, but we've been held up on that, so now we've got a secondary solution. So we have some estimated costs and potential income to the county. If we become someone who performs autopsies in Kootenai County, that's a potential income source. So it's not like just money going out. Other counties would be perhaps paying us, and some have committed to do that, paying us to do their autopsies instead of having that money go to Spokane. So in other words, there's going to be an initial outlay to create the facility, but once that's created, I'll show you some numbers that this isn't a wild and crazy venture that we're going into. And then the perspectives of the two officials, as I mentioned, and a time for questioning after. Now, we've reserved a couple of hours for this talk, but I don't anticipate that it'll take anywhere near that unless you guys have unlimited numbers of questions and you just want to see how long I can stand here. But I think it'll take much less than the allotted time period. Now, please know that I'm a fiscal conservative. That's just the bottom line of my family lineage. My family's been involved in politics for years. That's where we come from. So whenever you're talking about the potential of expanding the budget of Kootenai County, I want to put that into perspective. For years, the Kootenai County Coroner Office has been 0.5% of the total county budget. Okay, 0.5%. So if I ask for, in 1 year, a doubling of our budget, that takes Kootenai County clear up to 1% of the county budget. I mean, in other words, prospectively, I know we don't want to spend any extra money, but I just want to have it in perspective, because sometimes when we hear more money, larger budget, people just want to say no without even really having a big idea. But I just want to begin there because I'm very conscious of that fact, and you'll see what steps we took to try to reduce that. And right now, we are dependent upon funeral homes for refrigeration. That was something that really surprised me in coming in. There are some spots available, et cetera, which it's been a great relationship. It's worked very, very well. But my first thought is, if something big happens, people are going to mention my name. Why didn't you take care of this? And I'm the one who's got their name on the line of, let me give that guy a call, because there shouldn't be people unrefrigerated in Kootenai County. And so, yes, we have some MOU agreements if something big happens, but on a county that's growing, cases increasing, there's going to be a point where it's going to break. And if we have one large bus crash or one large boat, sink, our system would be overtaxed almost immediately. And so I want to head that off right away and be ahead of the game rather than going, oh my gosh, this is horrible, we better do something, which is unfortunate for most coroner offices around the nation, because I asked one real experienced coroner from Boise, why is it that all of the coroner's offices nationally seem to be underfunded? And this gentleman is in his 60s, early 70s, and he said, Dr. Duke, I've thought about this for a long, long time, and I think it's because nobody wants to talk about death. And I get that. I sort of get that. But we also have to realize that death and taxes our realities, right? And I said, how did you guys get this beautiful center in Ada County? And they said, well, what happened was, and I don't have proof for this, but this is just a story he told me, was that someone really influential and famous and well-known in Boise, their son died on the side of the road in a car accident, and he was there for hours because they didn't have the resources to take him off the freeway. And that gentleman just went wild and pushed through huge funding to change that situation around. And I just toured their new facility just recently, and their head medical examiner now has tremendous experience. I mean, he's been involved in some of the most famous cases around the United States with plane crashes and et cetera, and mass shootings and all of that kind of stuff. And he said, this building is the finest medical examiner building in the country, okay? What did it take? One person on the side of the road, okay? So I'm trying to be ahead of the game. Let's not wait until something horrible happens, and that's why we want to go down that pathway. So again, we love our relationship with the funeral homes, and we've got a very symbiotic, great relationship, but I'm just trying to think ahead. I hope you understand that. And then we depend completely on Spokane Medical Examiner for autopsies, but they're saturated. They assumed that they'd be able to build a brand new facility. I think it opened in 20 or 21, that this would be, something that would last for decades. And already they just notified us in November and December of last year, they're going to have to start cutting back on us. And they've eliminated a lot of counties, by the way. I spoke with one coroner from a county in Washington, how they're approaching what they're doing. And he said, we were just given an email, that's it. You can't send them to Spokane anymore, it's over. And that's how they knew. I mean, that's how they found out, and there's no choice. They don't have any options. They can't do anything, and I don't want to be in that position for our county, obviously. And so what they've done is what we anticipate having, the number of cases of autopsies that we anticipate sending them this year, they notified us that we have to send them 20% less this year, and I'll let you know what that means. And so we urgently need to get going. So let me give you an idea. These are the numbers of Ada and Canyon County. And the populations of the three counties are listed there. And as you can see, we're closer to Canyon, of course, in size. But if you look at the percentages, typically about 30% of, the coroner cases that basically we have to take over and visit, not just get phone calls on, but really have to take over and manage. Typically, and this is true around the nation, about 30% of the cases are sent to autopsy because the staff don't have tremendous experience, they don't want to take responsibility. Well, let's just send them off to autopsy. An autopsy costs like $2,000, okay? Well, look at, Canyon is not dramatically bigger in size than we are, and we sent this past year 66 and they sent 143, okay? And traditionally about 30% of cases, but because our staff is so experienced and we sit around and we're so knowledgeable, and we have an excellent staff, and some are in the back of the room right now, we've got a lot of years of experience, so we don't need to say, gosh, we don't know. We've really got a pretty good idea of why we're doing what we're doing. And we save Kootenai County a lot of money. We end up sending only about 12% of our cases, which is very unique around the nation. And practically every day, and certainly every Wednesday, we review all of the cases, all of the pictures, go through everything to make sure, does anyone have another insight? Could something else been the cause of this one? We scrutinize all of that. So it gives you an idea. So what Spokane has asked us to do by cutting back 20%, they're asking us now to only send 8% of our cases to autopsy from what we anticipate that we were going to send this year, somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 or so, okay? So what that's going to do is, restrict our ability, to be accurate, which undermines Kootenai County. Now, here are the number of cases that we've had in Kootenai County. Cases just happen to be even phone calls. If somebody is 95 years old and they're in a nursing home and they have multiple health problems and cancers, and they died. I mean, you know, we're called, but we don't really have to show up to that one. That's pretty obvious why that person passed away. But our calls that we are responsible for and respond to, as you can see, are increasing in number every year. 22 was 345, and we were 544 last year. The overdoses with fentanyl involved, our first fentanyl were in 21 with 19, then they went up to 39. We only had 16 documented last year, but as you can tell from what's going on around the country, that was just kind of an aberrancy. We're certainly going to see more this year. And our autopsies, as you can see, are increasing. And so there's a greater and greater demand as we grow. So the basic autopsy with Spokane is 1,800. A complete one is 2,200, but we really average closer to 2,000. So what we would estimate sending this year, like if we sent 72, it's hard to predict exactly how many deaths we're going to have in 2024, but with trends, we'll be sending 144,000 to Spokane. And also there's transportation costs with that. Now we have a $31,000 budget for transportation, but that has to do with both what's done locally and Spokane. But if we weren't spending to Spokane, that we would save several $1,000s there. Well, what's going on in Spokane? Okay, why have they been capped? Why have they hit the wall? These articles were taken out of the Spokesman Review in May of 1883. No, I'm kidding. It was June of 2023. The medical examiner's office investigated 49% more deaths in 2022 as overdoses continue to rise. They haven't calculated yet the number of overdoses for Spokane for 2023, but chances are it's still rising. Okay, and we know that's quite true already. And by the way, a lot of that, what's going on in Spokane, is filtering over to Kootenai County. I mean, there are people who are felons who are coming from Spokane, coming over to Kootenai County, and then trying to race back and get into car accidents or die of overdoses. And so because they die in Kootenai County, they become our case. So as Spokane struggles, they're dumping a lot of their stuff onto us. That's just kind of the nature of the beast. And so, but just imagine, they investigated 49% more deaths in just 1 year in 2022. Now, here's another article from February of this year. More people were shot by the Spokane law enforcement in 2 weeks than all of 2023. Spokane's having more and more problems. So that does spill to us. So we can't just talk about Kootenai County here. We have to have a feeling for what's going on there. So now, why might Spokane be saturated? Why are they having a tough time? They have openings to be able to hire more medical examiners, and I think this is part of the problem, is that these are the three medical examiner offices that are advertising for a new medical examiner. And there is a shortage of medical examiners in the United States. Medical examiners, if you want to make a lot of money, become a medical examiner. Go back to medical examiner school because because you can demand pretty much what you want because there is such a paucity of them. It's incredible. So ADA is advertising that they are willing to pay $345,000 a year at the most deluxe facility in the United States. Bannock is also a brand new facility. It's state of the art. They're offering basically that $300,000 a year, and you won't have to do any more than $150,000 a year. We had some medical examiners who got into trouble in Spokane because they were close to $400,000. So for about half the work, you can make $300,000, and what Spokane is offering right now is $242,000. So as you can imagine, they're budgeted. I'm not knocking the medical examiner's office. That's the budget they've been given, but that's how Spokane can impact us again, because that position most likely competing against these other two, if I had an opportunity to make $100,000 more and work at the finest place in America, I might choose Boise myself, you can imagine. So here's the communications I got from Spokane Medical Examiner Office, and On November 30th of last year, they notified me that we will need to start capping the number of cases because of what's going on. And in December 5th, 6 days later, I got an email that said there will be an 80% cap and you can't send more than 53. So that basically takes us from 12% down to 9 or 8%. And that's the direct communication. So that's how quickly we were notified. And so as you can imagine, if we're anticipating 72 or 75, et cetera, 53 is quite a cap. So my first initial proposal, being a fiscal conservative, was to say, well, I don't want to leave the people of Kootenai County with this problem. So why don't we apply for a grant? And that was our first thought. And there is an excellent grant that this past year they allowed for construction. And they gave out many, many grants at $350,000 to $500,000. And so it was 15 or 20, something like that. They gave out many of them. And we thought, how do we become more competitive? And I spoke with some people who say, well, if you become accredited, then your application is much stronger. So we started the accreditation process early after I entered the office. And we were able to achieve national accreditation within about 7 or 8 months, which most people, when they reach it, it takes them 18 months to do it, and we did it in almost record-setting time. And of the coroner offices, there's 2,000 in the United States. There's only 45 that are accredited, and we're about 46. In other words, we're in the top echelon of how we operate. And again, that has a lot to do with our staff who have tremendous experience and knowledge. And we already had processes in place that made it so that all we had to do is officially notify what it was we were pretty much doing, and we had to make some adjustments. But that's one of the reasons we came through with such flying colors, is because we have such a tremendous staff. And so, that's why we went down that pathway to become accredited, and then we'd apply for the grant this year. And we were thinking, let's keep all of our autopsy money in Kootenai County instead of giving it to Spokane. That's $144,000. That can help pay for our center. And then let me contact the surrounding counties in North Idaho, and I talked to every coroner north of Lewiston, and they said, we'd be happy to send our cases to you. So I got those numbers, and so it could then become a potential revenue source. And then on top of that, we could add lab equipment, x-ray equipment, et cetera, that are additional sources of income as well. So here's the grant, the Paul Coverdale Forensic Grant, and those are some of the numbers that they had gotten, and we were all excited about it, but unfortunately, the Paul Coverdale grant this year does not allow for construction. So instead of waiting for another year, it's like we have to keep moving forward. So secondary solution number 2 was to then come before the Board of Commissioners and ask them if I could get the right to shift some of the money in my budget to an architect, so that the architect could come up with the prices of 4 options. The super inexpensive medical examiner office in Kootenai County, and we hire somebody part-time to come in, please, to the drive-through covered, so they're protected from the snow and the rain if we unload bodies from a vehicle. Come right in, a full refrigeration unit, not unlike Spokane, with 2 autopsy rooms, one that can handle just normal autopsies, and then one that can handle what we kindly refer to as decomps. And you can imagine that those don't smell wonderfully, and so it's kind of best to have them in their own separate room, okay? And so, but of course, there's increasing costs with all of those. So our autopsy money would stay in Kootenai County, be $144,000, and we've estimated that the income, just from what the coroners told me, and if we keep it at $2,000, that our income from them would be $182,000. And these are the numbers they gave me over the phone as to what they anticipate this year. So I didn't make these numbers up. That's basically what they told me. So now, we have 4 versions, as I mentioned. Right now, we're in the Pierce Clegg building. That's near Coeur d'Alene High School and between Coeur d'Alene High School and the Sheriff's Office. And so in that building, because of Kootenai Electric being bought out by Kootenai County, the Sheriff's Office is largely moving over there. So it looks as if that building that we now reside in, just the light blue portion of, will largely be ours and maybe completely be ours. I mean, that's not 100% settled, but what that does is, without building a huge building, it allows us to expand in there and make some remodel and some modifications that aren't extremely expensive per se. And so the most inexpensive is to take where we're at right now and put the autopsy lab next door and put in some kind of portable refrigeration so that we don't, there's different levels. You can have modular units that can hold any number that you would imagine, from 9 to 15 to 25 or whatever, but they're modular, so it doesn't involve a huge infrastructure issue. And that's the least expensive. The next step up is, the most expensive. I didn't want to bore you with the other two, but the most expensive is a drive-through garage attached to it, 2 autopsy units, and then the light blue building be a refrigeration unit that could hold 80 people or 100 people, et cetera. So that whole room basically be kind of converted into refrigeration. And so right now, we've sent that off. The commissioners have allowed me to shift that money, and right now, LTA architects are working on what those 4 different levels will cost. And what I plan on doing is coming back to the commissioners and after I have the numbers in hand and say, well, which one would you like me to try to enter into the budget? I don't want to just do it blindly. Which one do you think is feasible, reasonable, with the thought of the future? Because sometimes you can be so inexpensive, you're remodeling 2 years down the line. So there's a balance between everything, and I'll let them make that decision. So what we did is we went through all the pro formas and the spreadsheets, and I just have a couple of pictures to show you about numbers. I don't want to bore the heck out of you, but we really tried to go through as carefully as we could with the numbers. This wasn't something that we just came up with and let me present a slide presentation. I mean, we really went through carefully with what the costs would be. And what worst case scenario column is really not worst case scenario, is the most expensive. That's if we had almost a fully operational medical examiner, not unlike Spokane, with 2 assistants and with 2 assistant coroners, forensic coroners, who help them do the autopsies, et cetera. And so then, best case scenario is, what would it be if we just had, the one room with the medical examiner and an assistant. And I've already called around and contacted some medical examiners, and they said, Coeur d'Alene's a beautiful place. I wouldn't mind coming by a few weeks a year, because we're looking at, instead of having them be there full time, to maybe having them work a couple of days every 2 weeks. And so we could just kind of load up our cases. Those that need to be done emergently, send them over to Spokane. But other than that, we might, some of them we can hold for a few days, et cetera. So we don't have to employ them constantly. And what's really interesting is that the coroner that I spoke with from the county in Washington, so in our best case scenario, our ongoing expenses would be $168,000 a year on an annual basis to pay for the people with that kind of a scenario. Well, there's another scenario that I learned about that was from the coroner that was in Washington, who Spokane had cut them off. And he said, well, what we do is we pay basically a headhunter organization that basically is of medical examiners, where you contract with a medical examiner, and they're called forensic pathology staffing. They staff the medical examiners, and so the profits go primarily to that company, so that they pay the transportation, they pay the housing, they take away a lot of headaches. for the county oversight, et cetera. But of course, the income drops down for the county tremendously because all we could really do, and what's kind of typical, instead of charging a surrounding county $2,000 for us to do the autopsy, they're charging the medical staffing, forensic medical staffing for the autopsy, and then they pay us like $300 for using our facility. So in other words, it's kind of, it drops down significantly, yet at the same time, our outgoing costs overall drop down as well. So, and the startup expenses for the most elaborate two-building or two-room autopsy center that can handle the decomps, et cetera, is $120,000. We've got all of the information for that from the company that we would order it from. There's not a lot of those companies, and there's specialized equipment and sinks, et cetera. We already went through the list of what we would need. But to just begin and open up the doors is $83,000. Okay, so the difference between the deluxes is $40,000. So this is kind of a quick summary of all of those potential costs and benefit. I'm still waiting on the numbers from LTA Architects so that I know, our Kootenai model, best case scenario, whether it's the 2-room or 1-room, or if we do the forensic pathology model, you were still waiting on the building costs. The likely equipment costs are there. The projected savings are there. The likely ongoing expenses are listed as I mentioned before. And the potential income, overall income, so their net projected income would be $13,000 if we overwatched it ourselves and charged it ourselves, et cetera. So it'd be a positive cash flow to the county. But at the same time, I'm sure there's hidden costs that we don't know about, but it'd be, closer to breaking even, of course. If we use the forensic pathology model, and all of these numbers are going to be really narrowed down at the end and clarified more when we know more detail, but basically we would still be out about $70,000 a year to use their model, but there's a lot less overhead and a lot less that we have to watch. So that's why I want to have a lot of minds looking at this and a lot of voices. So again, I'd like to reiterate, this isn't something that I had intended on doing. This wasn't something that I ever entered office even thinking of doing this, but our hand was pretty much kind of forced with those 2 emails. So in light of that, what's the solution? We've tried the grant pathway, so and it's not as if we can't apply for the grant next year. I mean, there's not a guarantee they'll allow construction next year. So I don't think that we should sit around and wait for that forever. And so we've had some cases actually recently that our office has been worked very closely with the prosecutor's office. And so Stan Mortensen was kind enough to come by to give his perspective of why an expansion may be of benefit to Kootenai County, and I'll just yield the floor to you, Stan. Thank you.
So as Dr. Duke mentioned, my name's Stanley Mortensen. I'm the prosecuting attorney for Kootenai County. And, I do have a perspective on this. I definitely think this is a conversation that has to happen, and I'm glad it's happening now. When my office prosecutes a case like a murder, there's got to be an autopsy. And after the autopsy, there's got to be a coroner's report. And Dr. Duke, didn't mention this, but the medical examiner and the coroner, they determine 2 different things. The medical examiner determines cause of death, and the coroner determines manner of death. And if you don't know what the difference is, think about somebody who drowns in a pool. Okay? The medical examiner is going to determine the cause of the death is drowning. Okay? What the coroner does is they determine whether or not it was an accident or homicide. Because somebody who drowns in a pool could have slipped and fell, and if you don't know how to swim, you're going to drown. If you are pushed in the pool and held underwater, it's going to be homicide or murder. Same thing, somebody dies because of blunt force trauma, right? They fall off a cliff. The cause of death, the medical examiner is going to determine blunt force trauma, all the rocks they hit on the way down. The manner of death determined by the coroner is going to be, did they slip off the trail and it's an accident? Did they jump off and commit suicide? Or were they pushed off and it's a homicide? Okay? So the medical examiner's office and the coroner's office are two very necessary things that my office has to consider when deciding whether or not to prosecute a case like a murder or a homicide. And there's a few things I want to talk about here, but I'll talk about where Dr. Johnson left off. We rely right now solely on Spokane. And there have been 2 cases in the last 12 months where we have gotten the medical examiner's report and their cause of death, their findings, we didn't agree with them. I'll just put it that way. And as Dr. Duke mentioned, we're paying them $2,000 to give us the autopsy, the report, and their cause of death. Well, when my office disagrees with the cause of death, we have to go out there and hire another pathologist, sometimes more than one, to come in and double check the work that was previously done for $2,000. And in one of those 2 cases, we hired a pathologist who is now in Seattle, and we paid them nearly $40,000 to review the work that Spokane did. Last week, we just got a conviction in a murder case. That's another case where we got the autopsy report, and we disagreed with the findings. We're going to spend close to, if not more than $100,000 contacting 5 or 6 different experts because we needed to prosecute that as a homicide and not a suicide. And so, that risk is always there. Even if we get a medical examiner's office someday and we employ our own pathologist, there's always the chance that the coroner in my office could disagree with their findings. I'm not just picking on Spokane here. That's a realistic possibility no matter who's doing the autopsy. But what I'm trying to say is this is part of the conversation. In the last 12 months, we've disagreed with Spokane twice, and it's resulted in paying a lot more than $4,000 for 2 autopsies. Okay? And so that goes into possibly why Spokane might be capping us. They have rising statistics. They have a legitimate reason to be capping us, independent of us disagreeing with them. I'm not going to allege that Spokane is capping us with the motivation that, we've disagreed with them twice in 1 year. But their numbers are rising. They're capping us. What happens if they keep capping us? What happens if one day they cut us off? We still have to have autopsies. And I want to be prepared for that. I don't want to be capped or cut off and then all of a sudden, what do? We're starting from ground zero. I would rather be proactive than reactive with this one. And so I think this is a conversation worth having. There's always the possibility that this could be a source of revenue for the county if we're attracting business from other counties. And so that this is a conversation that needs to happen. What I'm interested in is making sure we do it right. I'm not a doctor. Dr. Duke, Dr. Johnson is. And so I think he's off to a good start. I'm interested in having a lot of people come in and consult with us, give us their, opinions. I want to make sure that we do this right because this is a very important part of our criminal justice system. If we're not getting autopsies at all or good autopsies, it puts possible prosecution at risk. And everybody knows we're a beautiful part of the country and we live in a great part of the world, but bad things happen here. Murders, adults, babies, everybody in between. Autopsies happen not just because of murder, they happen because of overdoses. And so we're going to have autopsies, whether you like it or not. It's the cost of doing business. And I would rather keep our money in Idaho, and I would rather keep our money in Kootenai County than spend it somewhere else. And so with that, I just want to let you know, we've had some big cases over the years. In 2021, these are just numbers off the top of my head. We had 2 cases that were murder that went to Spokane and we prosecuted. In 2022, we had 4, and in 2023, we had 2. Just to give you an example too as to what we're looking at. Usually when the death happens, the autopsy happens within 24 to 48 hours. There are times where we wait a long period of time before we get the autopsy report. I've seen cases where we wait 7 days. That's extremely fast. I've seen cases where we may wait 1.5 months, 4 months, over 11 months, 2 months, 2.5 months. However, we have one death that occurred in October of 2022. We still don't have the autopsy report in that case. My office is waiting to prosecute a murder, and after almost 1.5 years, we don't have the autopsy report. If we don't have an autopsy report, we can't have a coroner's report. If we don't have either of those things, we can't prosecute. Now, Spokane may have a very good reason for, the delays that we're experiencing. I'm not sitting here saying that it's an unreasonable delay, but it's a delay, and it's got to be at least partially due to the fact that they are saturated. We are dealing with an office that is saturated, and I believe that's part of the reason why we experience delays like 11 months, 17 months. And so if we are doing these things ourselves, if we are self-sustained, I don't think we're going to have these long delays either. And when we're talking about prosecuting a murder, this is somebody who's gone 1.5 years and we haven't been able to prosecute them because we don't have what we need. And so there's a lot of components to this conversation that we do need to have. And I just wanted to give you those little tidbits, from my perspective. So, are there any other questions for me, or is there anything I didn't address that you wanted to hear from me, Dr. Johnson? Okay. Now, in all fairness, sometimes before we can have an autopsy report, Spokane and even Kootenai, if we have ours, we're going to have to send things out to other labs. Sometimes it's a lab in Pennsylvania, sometimes it's a lab in Seattle or Salt Lake. And so, whether it's a brainstem or an eye or blood work, I know this sounds gruesome, but sometimes it takes, the opinion of multiple experts. That can cause delays as well. So again, I'm not sitting here pointing the finger at Spokane saying these are unreasonable delays, but I would imagine that part of the reason for delays is because they have an increased number of autopsies they're doing as well, and that's evidenced by the fact that they've emailed Dr. Johnson and said they're going to start capping us. And so, largely law enforcement, we're reactionary. Very few times can law enforcement be proactive. This is not an area where I think we need to be reactive. If we are reacting to Spokane capping us to the point where there's closing us off, where are we going to put the bodies? How are we going to preserve them until autopsy? And what's the cost of transporting a body to Seattle or Boise? That's going to cost more money in the long run than it is just to open up our own facility. I'm heavily involved with the sheriff's office. For decades now, we've talked about expanding the jail. We all know now the debate is right. If we would have finished the jail years ago, it wouldn't cost 2, 3, 4 times what it would have costed then. Now we're paying it now. I don't want to be in a position where in 10 years we're talking about getting a medical examiner's office and it costs way more to build it in 10 years than it would have to build it this year or next year or even the year after. And so, the price is only going to go up. I definitely believe this is a conversation we have to have now. We're not going to get a medical examiner's office overnight. It may take 1 year or 2, I don't know. But this is a conversation we have to have. So I appreciate your time.
And you can stay around.
I will, yes.
I don't know that it matters. There we go. So I am tasked as a commissioner to allocate resources throughout all of our county operations. So I keep in mind mandated services and what is the proper role of government. As government, what do we need to fund? And that is definitely justice services. So all of our county offices work together. So it's an exercise in taking all the needs during the budget season and prioritizing them. So for me, this is going to be a bit of a priority because it's not just the coroner's office that's affected, it is also the prosecution, which then also affects our sheriff's office. So I think it's very important to have this conversation with the public because it will, cost money. And we want to do it as frugally as possible while meeting the needs of the community. So I don't really have much else to add because, I think they covered it all. But it is something that we should look into and seriously consider this budget season and find out how we can bring this along so we are not caught by one day. It's like, okay, you can't go here anymore. So now what do we actually do to meet the needs of the community members? And I think everybody understands the gravity of if we are not able to prosecute murderers, likely it's going to happen again. There's that small percentage of it, they just will do this again. So we want to make sure that if there is a loss of life, that we are capturing that and being able to bring that person to justice. So any questions for me? Okay, so I'll turn it back over to Dr. Duke for any questions on the lab.
Alrighty. Thank you very much, Leslie and Stan. And Stan Mortensen mentioned something very important that I didn't is, well, what if Spokane cuts us off? Then we would have to transport people to Boise or Seattle. The only other city that does it is Missoula, and we've already contacted Missoula, and they said, no, we can't take anything. We can't. Sorry, no way. So you can imagine 72 trips, and would it be involved driving down to Boise in a refrigerated vehicle, staying overnight, arranging all of that, et cetera, the time involved on the staff to go down there, hotel costs, food costs, all that kind of stuff, and then they could charge whatever they want to because they know they've got us. We're up the creek if we have to be driving people hundreds of miles away for our autopsies. And again, we already are at an incredibly low number. I mean, 12% nationally is a very unique number. We already send very, very few comparatively. So to ask us to go down to 8 or whatever, there's a point where our ability to prosecute and our ability to really find truth is really going to be compromised. So that was a great point as well. So are there any questions? I knew it wouldn't take 2 hours, so are there any questions that you guys may have? Yes?
A few questions. Why are we at 12% compared to 30% with everyone else?
So why are we 12% compared to everyone else in our state at 30%? What is different? What are we doing different than what other areas are doing?
What we're doing differently is the people in the back row back there. They are exceedingly experienced. And they've been through, national, we continuously send people to conferences and they're IACME certified. They've gone through lots of testing and some have been in, Lynn's been in the office over 20 years. Is that correct, Lynn? 20? And she's chief medical examiner or deputy. And so with that kind of experience, and John has been working, how many years, John, have you been there? Right, and Joe? 7. So, I mean, that kind of experience is rare. And
So you're saying the other places don't have that kind of experience?
They don't have that kind of experience and knowledge. And also we work together as a team. In larger cities, a lot of people work, excuse me, they work by themselves a lot of times and they're just sent out like crazy. And they might not have the chance to thoroughly investigate or take the pictures, or maybe where they're at, it's not, really safe to maybe take 100, 150 pictures, which is not an unusual number for us. And we go back to the funeral homes and we'll unzip the bag and take more pictures and go in greater depth and reanalyze and go back to, so I mean, we're very, very thorough. And so the whole purpose of that is largely because of the experience, and in our group meetings where we go through them all together, we all challenge one another as if, we play devil's advocate with one another. How do we know this wasn't a murder? How do we know this was a suicide? This doesn't seem like a suicide to me. I mean, we had a case recently where we were kind of arguing about that for like 4 days. But I mean, that's great, because we're all trying to think outside the box. We just don't let stuff go, and we're not just cookie cutter, off, and then the report comes back, let me sign it. That's not how we approach it. I mean, the people that are in the office love what they do. We all love what we do.
Yeah, sounds like you have some great teamwork there, so I applaud
absolutely.
I applaud our back row back there, so thank you guys for doing such a great job. On your, right on the slide underneath that about the comparison of us to other counties, you also have coroner calls. Are those just notifications of deaths? Is that what that is, that you
Yeah.
have under coroner calls? So that's
Right.
just, and those are things that are outside of the hospital, I'm assuming?
It-
Nursing home, things along that line?
Yes. In other words, we get phone calls, anything that's called an unattended death, we are responsible for. So anyone who wasn't directly under the care of a doctor, for example, who died in their home, and they weren't at the hospital, they weren't under close care, but they were living at home and they passed away. So when the police, grandma isn't responding to phone calls, they send the police out. Police find that this person has passed away. We work with police and fire real closely as to what were the statistics, what was the scene, were the doors locked, was there any possibility of break-in, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we go through all of that suspicious as if, there might have been something wrong. And if it's somebody that, again, like I was mentioning earlier, is in their 90s and they're got terminal cancer and diabetes and on multiple medications and they're found deceased in bed, that's not something that we're going to necessarily autopsy. So that's our case, our responsibility, but we're not going to autopsy that.
Yeah, and so nursing homes are already people under physician's care, so that would be very unusual for them to require autopsy.
I mean, when they're under, but sometimes if they haven't been there very long, if someone's in the hospital less than 24 hours, that becomes our responsibility. If they're in hospice less than 24 hours or a nursing home, so there are limitations that just because they showed up to the building doesn't mean it's out of our purview.
When was the last time we had high refrigeration needs? Because you talk about if we had a catastrophic accident with a high death count, when was the last time that happened in Kootenai County where we had a high death count requiring high refrigeration needs?
Yeah. The higher death count was we were very, very fortunate. The 2 airplanes that hit over the lake that involved 9 people. We were very fortunate, basically, that those were recovered one at a time because of where they crashed, and it took some days to recover all of the bodies. So that wasn't considered a high death count. Had they collided over Coeur d'Alene and hit on Sherman, that would have definitely been that. Now, when you think about it, and sometimes people look at the perspective of, well, we haven't had anything, therefore we won't have anything in the future. You know what I mean? But we have so many tour buses that go through here. I mean, we got the statistics from ISP, and this is statistics from several years ago. That's the most recent they had. Was that 500,000 people show up to Silverwood every year. And I'm sure it's bigger than that now. These were the older statistics. When you're talking about 500,000 people showing up to a facility that's in our county that we're responsible for, and all of the touring boats and everyone who comes from the outside, and again, I know those are great made boats and et cetera, but All you have to do is drive down the 95 anytime in the summer, and you're going to have tour buses go by. All it takes one crash of one of those buses, and there's 60 people involved, and we would be overwhelmed like immediately.
What's our current refrigeration status? How many bodies can we hold?
Well, it depends on what's available in nursing homes, and that fluctuates. I mean, sometimes there's only 5 spots in one nursing home. There's three funeral home. So there's 3 basic funeral homes that we use. Yeah, sorry.
Nursing home.
Sorry,
Oh,
sorry.
really?
Yeah, it was a slip. I'm sorry.
Makes me
You were
nervous
just
for the
mentioning nursing
nursing
homes. Okay, come on, give me a break. No, but we have we have 3 funeral homes. And so, Yates, English, and Bell Tower. And so Bell Tower has some more refrigeration, but again, the available spots are dependent upon what's in their facility at that moment. So sometimes during the summer, it seems that our rates are a little bit higher, and there might be only 3 to 5 spots, not unusually. And so we don't have very much capacity. That was one of the things that shocked me, because I toured all of these places, and it's kind of like, wow, this isn't much capacity.
So we don't have any refrigeration space ourselves? It's all
Nope.
through the
Nope,
funeral homes?
No, Kootenai County doesn't. We have MOUs where if we needed to get a refrigeration truck from a food company, but that's almost pretty much like buying the truck, because most food companies aren't going to want to take the truck back, right?
Oh, gosh, no, I hope not.
And so if there was something catastrophic, would you like to know that, boy, there's a smell on these strawberries?
You have to have one of those cleaner companies that they have on TV.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we do have an agreement. We're very, very fortunate in Kootenai County that we do have the U.S. Forest Service nursery. They have huge buildings that are refrigerated for the raising of the small trees, and they send them all over the country. We're incredibly fortunate because that facility there's not very many Forest Service facilities like that, and they have building after building where the 100, 200, 300, thousands could fit in those buildings if we absolutely needed it. So we could handle, but then large numbers, but we only have so much staff, and that would be from driving to that facility back to ours, depositing there, et cetera, on a regular run, a normal processing pattern that puts tremendous stress on our staff, et cetera, et cetera. So,
Oh, yeah. Where would we send, because, it sounds like Spokane is having a staffing issue. Because if they're over exceeding their capacity to do autopsies, then it must be related to a staffing issue. That's my assumption.
Sure.
So if they resolve their staffing issue, I would assume, but that's, assumptions are, that the
That's a
cap
correct assumption.
Yes, I know, that the cap would go away, per se, but maybe not, because once you put the cap in place,
Well,
sometimes-
no, I think it's a little bit more, and I went through the offering of the income, and that's a significant contributing factor. Ada's offering $350 and Spokane's offering $250 for the same job, and they're worked really, really hard in Spokane, and they advertise in the 2 Idaho locations that they don't have to work that hard, not even a fraction as much. So, and they're state-of-the-art, facilities. But not only that, but as I mentioned, there's more shootings in Spokane. Crime is going up tremendously. Gangs have moved in, cartel has moved in. Just the 49% increase in overdose investigations. I mean, even if they hired that next person tomorrow, and by the way, that position has been open for years. It wasn't just opened a month ago. And they haven't been able to fill it. And I called the head medical examiner over there, and I just said, if you hear news that I'm going to be talking about building our own, please know I'm trying to alleviate the pressure that's on all of us. I'm not trying to cause any trouble in our relationship with you. And she said, no, I totally understand that. We have needs in this area. I mean, it is a growing area. And so if there's more shootings already in Spokane than there was all of last year, I mean, the crime issue is, so those translate to us ultimately. So even if they hired somebody brand new, I don't think it would take long for that pressure to come right back again.
So we we couldn't send them to Spokane, what about those lovely facilities in Ada County and Bannock County? Because you didn't mention Bannock, you said Boise and Seattle. Why not Bannock?
Well, what they're doing is they're opening a facility that's kind of minimally, staffed, sort of like what we propose to do. This is their first year. They haven't even, I don't think, officially opened yet. So they're advertising for staff, but they haven't officially opened yet. But, if they were able to take some of our cases, that would be a possibility. Yet, it's not easy to get down there, much easier to get down there than it is to Boise. And Missoula would be closer, way closer. But Missoula, that's a no, they wouldn't even entertain the question. It was not, sorry, can't even talk about it. So the costs would be way above $2,000 per case, way above that. I mean, when you add the transportation and staying in a hotel or, et cetera, or the staffing to assist, and it's got to be refrigeration type vehicles. I mean, it would go way above $2,000 a case. I mean, eventually it wouldn't take very long to pay for our facility just based on the extra costs of sending people to Seattle and Boise.
So what are you really wanting as far as, are you wanting a forensic pathologist? Are you wanting a medical examiner? What is it that you
Well, basically,
want?
they're very, very similar in how they function. I mean, in other words, can they do autopsies and the medical examiner it depends on their licensing as to, are they capable of being recognized as a verifiable source that their findings can be used in a court of law.
So are you proposing for us here, because this is our taxpayer dollars, are you proposing from the presentation, it's a really good bird's eye view into things, but are you proposing a full-time person or really a part-time person?
No, really a part-time person and because they're in a position right now where they can take, I've called several and they say, you'd probably be able to get a part-time person in Kootenai County who would show up 2 days every 2 weeks for about $250,000.
That's a lot of money.
That is a lot of money, but they're in a position where they are in control. That's like saying, a movie star, if you want to hire a movie star, that's a lot of money. I mean, in other words, they're in that position of demanding, not begging. And so they could have several jobs like ours and no one can touch them because there are very few, there's a paucity of them around the nation. And they're not hardly turning out anyone, very few people are interested in the position. There's not a lot of people who love to do death investigations and do autopsies all day.
Yeah.
It's not a pleasant job. But maybe I should let someone else have an opportunity to talk and then I can come back to you. I just didn't want to give you the whole time. I mean, come on. Oh, well, please.
Hey, Dr. Duke. I'm Rob Beers on the Bonner County Coroner.
Yeah.
I just wanted to update you guys or let you know we budget for 18 autopsies, not 22.
Oh, okay.
And the other thing, too, is that my autopsy suite is almost done.
Okay.
So at some point, and maybe not with me, I would probably come down to Kootenai County
Okay.
to do autopsies.
All right.
But at some point, Bonner County will be self-sufficient.
Okay. No, great. That's awesome. And because, that was a misinterpretation, Rob, from my conversation with you. Because I thought you said, are you going to be opening it up? And I thought you had said, no, I'm not planning on that. So that's new news, and thank you.
We're opening it, but I probably wouldn't use it for a little while.
Well, yeah, that's kind of what that's kind of why I threw your numbers in here. Because it was kind of like, okay, if I'm making a proposal today, put it in front of the board today, and you'd mentioned that if we were open, you'd bring us cases, that's why I added you on there. But thanks for that.
Yeah, probably would, but the end, we're also
Okay, great. Any other questions, or does she deserve it back, I guess? Oh, no, here we go.
If the grant doesn't cover construction, what does it cover?
The grant from this year, they did cover construction, not the one we applied for, but the one that was like 2023. But they also apply for staffing. I mean, in other words, they would help pay for, the medical examiner. They pay for equipment. They pay for just about anything you can imagine. It came with the idea from the government that there is a paucity and counties are desperately in need of having more facilities. And so because of that, let's help them out. So, but it's kind of amazing when there's such a tremendous shortage and there's like basically one grant. Yeah, it's unfortunate that government spends a lot of money on a lot of stuff, but this is just not a popular thing for them to spend money on, so.
So this one's actually directed at our prosecutor. So how about court time that would be needed by the individual? Because, you're not talking about the court time for the medical examiner from Spokane. So if we had one here that was doing this, how much court time would they probably be doing? And then is that paid for because they're on our salary or what?
Sure. So, yeah, so, anytime there's an autopsy and then anytime there's a prosecution, there's always the chance that the defendant's going to want their day in court, right? And so if there's going to be a trial or any other hearing where I have to have witnesses, the medical examiner office is going to be somebody who's going to be subpoenaed. And so, whether it's Spokane or, Kootenai County or anywhere else, whoever's doing that autopsy, we're going to have to get them a subpoena, we're going to have to drag them into court, and they're going to have to spend time in court. It's impossible for me to estimate how much time we'd be, paying them to be on the stand. I know that with some of our experts that we've hired in these cases where we've had to kind of, challenge the Spokane findings, some of these experts, they demand $800 to $1,200 an hour and a minimum of 8 hours. And like Dr. Duke said, they're in a position where they're in total control over what they charge. If we are employing or contracting with a medical examiner, that is definitely something we can build into the contract, and maybe we'll have a little more control over that. I know that Spokane has been very good. Usually when we are subpoenaing somebody from another state, there's a long process that we have to go through in order to, properly give somebody a subpoena and force them to court. The Spokane Medical Examiner's Office has been playing very well with us. They don't require us to jump through those hoops. If we call them up and tell them, we need you in court on this day at this time, they're going to be there. If we have our own medical examiner's office, or if we are contracting with somebody, it's going to be a lot like that, where we can, basically put that into the contract and they agree that they're going to be there, and maybe we can kind of control their rates a little bit. There's no way for me to just sit here and say, what the average is or what we can expect. It depends on the case. Sometimes the medical examiner's office might be on and off the stand in an hour. They might be on there for 4 or 5 hours. There's just no way of knowing that.
And so we pay for that testimony, correct?
Yes.
So the other question that I have too is, you almost made it sound like if we have our own contracted medical examiner person, that we wouldn't need to bring in expert witnesses because we would never disagree with them. Now,
I think what I said is that it's always possible that even if we have our own, we could still disagree with them. And then we would, of course, need to talk to other experts.
So having our own won't alleviate the situation that you were talking about earlier.
It's always possible that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and in contribution to their perspective, a lot of times that, as they're going through the case, I can walk in and say, what are your findings? What do you see? Et cetera, et cetera. Have you considered this? Have you thought about that? Not that I'm trying to force them down one position or another, but I think that some of the cases that we ran into in this last year, they didn't have somebody standing there saying, well, what about this point? What about that point? And I think that that's why there ended up being differences. So sometimes, when you have 2 or 3 heads together looking at something, you get a different perspective than if you're just the only one doing it.
Thank you. I think I've exhausted my questions.
Okay. Yes.
Listening to this, I like your idea.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's something we need. We are continually growing as a community. Spokane's growing, everywhere around us is growing. Cartel is in Spokane. I am originally from Bozeman area. My mom's there. That's happening over there. So that does produce a lot more overdoses and a lot more autopsies. I think our families in this community deserve to have a quicker trial on a murder trial. And this is going, I see where you're saying that this is going to produce this. We have a lot of money in the county that is wasted. I don't see this as a waste. I see this as a necessary thing for this community.
Oh, well, thank you. No, I appreciate that. And you know, what's interesting, one topic I didn't even touch upon is, you know, what's called a Len Bias case. And I don't know if you're familiar with who Len Bias was, but he was, at the time, I think it was 1984, he was like the #1 basketball player in the nation. He had the capability, not unlike LeBron James, et cetera. He was a fantastic basketball player. And he signed with the Boston Celtics, and that night he died of a cocaine overdose. So you can imagine the most admired basketball player in America all of a sudden dying. And so it impacted a lot of people. It was more like, well, this isn't right. We got to do something. And so over the years, and I've got a whole long explanation of this, but basically it's translated to the idea that and it's been focused now on fentanyl. If you can find a case that involves fentanyl only, then law enforcement can go immediately up the chain and really trying to find out, well, how did this person get fentanyl? And the charges and the penalties are exceedingly high, so they become very aggressive. And they can go up the chain pretty fast because a lot of people aren't going to want to spend tremendous amounts of time for just one overdose. And we just recently had a Len Bias case because we're part of a program with ISP where we sent down the case one day, and then the next day we got the results back and notified police. So within 24 hours, we were able to notify that so that police could be real aggressive about the investigation. I'm looking to buy a $45,000 machine where we can get that result in 30 minutes. That same machine that they're using in Boise, we could have it so that while detectives are still on the scene, we could give them the result and they could begin the aggressive investigation immediately. See, that's kind of the power and the benefit of the office. And so there's a lot of different areas where it does benefit for sure. No, absolutely, absolutely. You bet. Proactively save lives, for sure. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? Tomatoes, anything? All right, well, thank you, everyone, for your time. Thank you, Prosecutor Sam Mortensen, for your time. Thank you, Commissioner Leslie Duncan, for your time. And thanks, everyone, our team. Thank you, guys, for what you do. And thanks, everyone, for attending. And hopefully, everyone who watches this video will have a greater idea as to why we're doing what we're doing, and thank you very much.